with some of my colleagues at Ruby for this month's briefing. And this month's briefing is a couple of things. One, we'll be hearing from Jared Abbott, who I'll introduce in a moment, of some really encouraging new analysis that they've done at his center. But also, we're going to have a little bit of a teaser that Jared and I together are going to do for the launch of Ruby's upcoming campaign called Beyond Resistance. So we sort of have two related elements to our presentation today. Otherwise, we'll follow the usual form with roughly 25 minutes of folks talking, and then the balance, 35 minutes or more of Q&A. We're going to ask all of you to stay on mute until we get to the Q&A, and at that point, Erica will join me in looking through the chat to find questions for Jared or myself. And we also will take raised hands, physically or symbolic raised hands, iconic, I guess you'd say, raised hands. So again, thanks so much for joining us for this exciting event. I've had the privilege of getting to know Jared Abbott for the last year, basically, in greater depth. He's a political science who teaches political science at Cal State, and he also is a founder and the executive director of the Center for Working Class Politics. And if you don't know of them, this is an outfit that does some tremendous research and analysis around issues surrounding working class people. Their most recent study, which Jared is going to talk to us about a little bit, just came out in the last few weeks, and it's called Working Class Social and Economic Attitudes and Analysis. So I'll turn it over to Jared, who's going to tell us a little bit about their core findings and how that relates to this Beyond Resistance campaign.
Okay, thank you, Anthony. It's great to be here with everybody. I'm just going to share some slides here. Like Anthony said, I'm Jared Abbott, and I am the director of the Center for Working Class Politics. And I was very pleased to get the invitation to talk here because I think that the Beyond Resistance campaign that Anthony has heroically been organizing and with so many of your partners is very important, and it's going to fill a gap in sort of organizing in opposition to the Trump administration that is sorely needed, and it's needed based on some of the insights of the research that we at the Center for Working Class Politics have been doing. And I wanted to kind of frame my comments a little bit in a discussion of my own experience in sort of what you might call the sort of mainstream approach to resisting or fighting against the Trump administration right now, which is the No Kings movement. And I had the privilege of attending a rally of No Kings in my hometown of Brookville, Indiana, which is a rural town of about 1,500 people, on June 14th. And it was quite inspiring, I have to say, because I haven't seen this many people out in Brookville for any kind of rally since the time that many of my cousins and uncles, fought to keep the Ten Commandments on the courthouse lawn about a decade ago. But here we actually have a economic populist progressive movement in some force. 50, 75 people came out, and it was really inspiring. And they faced a lot of criticism, people blowing diesel smoke in their faces, in anger as they drove by in their F-250s down Main Street. And I found it to be quite moving, actually, and extremely important work. And at the same time, I also noticed the messaging was messaging that wasn't necessarily even as true as most of it is. Trump is a huge threat to democracy, as we all know. It's a major historic crisis. But when I talked with folks in Brookville, who are people that aren't involved in politics, or people that might have voted for Trump, or even some Democrats, they didn't really connect with a lot of this messaging. They wanted, folks to be talking more, and some of them were, but they wanted folks to be talking more about material issues and how there was an alternative that might actually be out there to help working class people and help rural people in a way that Trump has claimed that he wants to do, but has in fact failed and will likely continue to fail doing. And we've actually found in our work at the Center for Working Class Politics that when you focus on the resistance as a messaging center or as a focus of your campaign and your rhetoric, you're less likely to break through to voters and to independents and to rural folks and to working class folks than you are if you focus on the importance of offering a politics that speaks to the needs, the material, needs and hopes and aspirations of working class people and the anger that they feel about the rigged economic system in which we live. And so one example of this is we fielded a survey in Pennsylvania before the election last year, and we tested a bunch of different messages that Harris could have given, and she actually did give a few of them. One of which was this message about the Trump being a threat to democracy, which is the third message you see here, where she says, all of this stuff may be objectively true. Donald Trump is a criminal convicted felon. Obviously, he wants to get the Justice Department, and as we now know that's coming true. He wants to terminate, threats to the United States, and et cetera, et cetera. As true as all of that is, it didn't resonate nearly to the same extent as this full-throated populist messaging at the top, which focuses less on Trump as a threat to democracy and much more on the need to offer a positive alternative to Trump and to call out the ways in which billionaires like Trump are not delivering for working class people and haven't been doing so for decades and have been responsible for the hollowing out of communities, rural communities, and formerly industrialized communities all throughout the country over the past several decades. And we found here that the focusing on the threat to democracy actually resonates not substantially less than the various forms of full-throated economic populism that we tested Pennsylvania voters on. And so that's the reason why I think a campaign like Beyond Resistance, which obviously has the same goal of trying to build a coalition to stop the horrible things that the Trump administration is doing in this moment of historic crisis, but is doing so in a way that tries to tap into some of the resentments and anger and anxieties around economic issues that to some degree, or maybe even to a large degree, drove many people, to support or to take a gamble on Trump in the first place, particularly many working class or lower income folks that moved over to the Republicans in 2024, who were, to a larger extent than in the past, Latino and Indian African American, about a quarter of African American men voted for Trump in 2024. And we know that working class people, no matter how you define working class, hugely support a range of progressive economic issues, all the way from expanding, lowering prescription drug prices and expanding and increasing the minimum wage to protecting good factory and high-paying jobs from offshoring and automation to even supporting the idea of a federal jobs guarantee, all the way over to all kinds of expansions of services that help working people like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, et cetera, and taxing the rich. So we know that these are the issues that working class people really care about and that motivate them. And if we could offer a positive vision and a critique of Trump's inability to actually deliver on any of these things that really matter to working class people, we may be on stronger footing to build the majoritarian coalitions that we need in 2026, 2028, and beyond in order to stop Trump and stop the rise of authoritarianism. And this is particularly true among two groups that are critical for our success in the electoral arena over the coming years. The first of which is people that just sort of are Democrats or sort of would otherwise probably vote for Democrats, but just sort of sit out elections for a number of reasons. These are people who in 2024 were overwhelmingly concerned about economic issues. So Democrats who didn't vote in 2024 were more than twice as likely to report that they were concerned about their economic situation, that they felt the economy was worse now than it was 12 months ago, and that their income had suffered relative to 12 months ago. And these are people who are also highly progressive on a host of economic issues, that they would support a bold progressive vision that would actually deliver to help working class people in a way that Trump has, in a sort of in a fake way said he was going to do, but has not. And so, for infrequent voters, an economic populist message that addresses these economic anxieties that the Harris campaign was unable or unwilling to do could go a huge way toward bringing back some of the folks that saw some sort of temporary appeal in Trump in 2024 and may now be regretting it. And even among Trump voters, and this is the thing that Anthony was mentioning, our report that just came out a few weeks ago, we actually calculated the percentage of Trump voters in 2020. We're doing it for 2024 now, but I don't have the final version to show you, but it's similar that a substantial percentage of Trump voters were essentially Bernie-crats, in terms of their economic views in 2020. So 20% of Trump voters in 2020, simultaneously supported increased spending on public schools, increased Social Security spending, raising the minimum wage, and imposing a millionaire's tax. That's a fifth of all Trump voters, or about 5% of the electorate. And in some swing states, given the higher percentage of working class voters in those states, those percentages are even higher. And so, a 5 percentage point difference, in any swing state is massive, given how close these races are decided, the margins. And you might be thinking, well, none of those people are going to ever be able to come over to the progressive side anyway, because even if they have somewhat progressive views on economics, they might be hopelessly conservative on social or cultural issues, and Democrats would just be anathema to them regardless. Well, even there, we calculated the percentage of Trump voters from 2020, working class Trump voters who were not conservative, so they held either progressive or moderate views on a whole range of social and cultural issues. We basically made an index of cultural conservatism and social conservatism, and we excluded the top third of conservative views from among Trump voters in 2020. And even there, even though the percentages are small in terms of the entire electorate, the number of people that could potentially be persuaded by an economic populist message from progressives, is large enough to decide elections in any of the key swing states. They're going to be up for grabs, or any of the key Senate seats that are going to be up for grabs in the next couple of election cycles. So bottom line is, there's real potential here for stopping or pushing back against the Trump administration's attacks on our democracy by showing working class people that there's a real alternative, a real progressive a sort of vision for how those folks' lives can be improved, that Trump has promised to deliver, but is utterly failing to deliver. And that should be the focus of our work, or at least an important focus of our work, rather than trying to meet people, on ground of sort of abstract accountability or democracy issues that might not be felt as deeply or as immediately by many working class and certainly rural people across the country. So I'll leave it there, and I appreciate you listening to my comments. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out, jared@workingclasspolitics.org. Thank you very much.
That's excellent, Jared. That was a fast and furious presentation. I loved it. It was just so strong and really provided the rationale. If you don't, yep, stop sharing. That's great. So I wanted to just round out the conversation with a little bit of information about this Beyond Resistance campaign. And then we're going to move quickly to a conversation. So in fact, you can put your questions for Jared about any of their studies or their analysis in the chat now. And then we can talk about both the center and their work, as well as the campaign. Here it is in a nutshell. First of all, today is like a warm-up because the official launch of the Beyond Resistance campaign is a week from today, slightly different hours, 7 p.m. Eastern will start. And at that point, we're going to have Congressman Ro Khanna, who is quite the champion of working class and rural people. He's one of the people in Congress who has embraced Ruby's Rural New Deal. He is going to be our kind of lead speaker, but we actually have a terrific mix of speakers. mostly coming from the partners that have joined the campaign with Ruby. This is not a solo effort by Ruby. This is, I would say at this point, about 15 partners, major partners in the coalition, and expanding every day. So Jackie will post, if she hasn't already, the signups both to join the campaign and to sign up for the launch event next week. Let me just distinguish those two just a hair. If you sign up for just the launch event, then you will get the Zoom link and information about the launch event. But if you also sign up for the campaign, then you will get our weekly or bi-weekly, every other week, mailings that give you continued information about the Beyond Resistance campaign. So I'd encourage you to do both. That's my second point. So this is September 10th is really just the beginning. Right now we have a little bit less than a dozen follow-up events planned and on the schedule for September, October, and November. And again, this is evolving and we're adding many more events all the time. You know, as Jared said, it's really impressive when he went back to his small hometown in Indiana and saw all those folks turning out. And I've got to say the same thing about Abingdon, Virginia, where I am. It's a little bigger than Jared's hometown, but it's 8,000 people. And the local organizers, many of them friends of mine, have been consistently turning out hundreds of people, including one gathering with over 700. That is really impressive. And part of why people have been able to do that is because Indivisible, Move On, and some other major organizations have provided a framework, themes on specific days, maybe some talking points if people want to share those, and then the idea of this decentralized protest against the Trump administration emerging all over the country. We believe, as Jarrett says, that the work that's been done there has been very important, and it's been really essential that people hear about the resistance to Trump. And as Jared said, there's this huge gap. And all of the protests I've been to and many that I've seen or read about, very, very little to do with kitchen table issues, very little to do with the rising price of groceries or other issues like that that people are facing, let alone the layoffs at factories as they close and lose their funding, or what's happened to markets for thousands and thousands of farmers. It's just not been a core part. So that then leads me to the next thing I'll say is that what this campaign intends to do, but we need your help to do it in both our first event and continuing thereon. We've identified 4 elements. You could think of them as 4 legs in the stool. The first is that when we're screaming about Trump and how he's destroying so many lives, we need to put working class, rural people right up there with all of the other vulnerable groups that we've been talking about since January. Not to displace those many other important critical groups that are struggling, but to say also to speak out in our signs and our social media posts and memes about what's happening to farmers, to small businesses, to manufacturing jobs, to rural workers, to unions who are getting hammered in so many ways by Trump. So the first is just including working folks and rural people among the harms, the victims of Trump. That's just the first tweak. Then the second is to also lift up rural success stories. Because as many of you know, Ruby talks about this. We've had a social media campaign and we've done some of our briefings about it. In the midst of all the struggle and all the craziness, there's still amazing things happening in small towns and rural areas in just about every dimension of life, around rural health care, affordable housing, cleaning up environmental problems from the past, economic development, post-coal, post-timber, new economies. There's so much happening, and it's really important that we consistently lift those local, sometimes bigger than local, success stories up. The third element is we've got to put forth a clear and compelling vision of what we would do different. Yes, we can say clear enough, Trump lied about how he's for the working class. Trump lied about how he's for farmers. He lied about how he's even for coal miners. But the fact of the matter is, what do we plan to do It can be policies we've had in the past, and it can be brand new policies. It can be changes from past policies. But what is our vision and our platform for making life better for ordinary folks, for working people and rural folks? So a clear, compelling vision. And Ruby has elements to offer that, as do other partners. And last is super critical in a great way to really engage is local community engagement. Ruby's model for that, some of you know, is our Community Works, which started 2 years ago in Virginia and then a year later in Georgia. Now we're in 6 or 7 states. We've got Community Works emerging all over. We see this as perhaps the most invigorating and hands-on way to begin to challenge the narrative that our fellow Americans, our neighbors, are our enemy, because Community Works bypasses the partisanship and the politics and gets people working side by side to fix stuff, to solve local problems across the ideological divide, irrespective of the ideological divide. So those 4 elements is what we're going to be providing as the kind of the 4 legs of the stool of this Beyond Resistance campaign. And with our current partners, and hopefully many of you will join as partners as well, what we'll be looking for is every chance you have to magnify the campaign, to talk about it in the media, in the social media, or among friends, to host events and actions yourself. All of this we'll lay out in considerably more detail beginning next Wednesday at the launch event. So I'll stop there. We're right at about 4:24, so we got plenty of time for conversation, and open it up now to your questions and comments for Jared and for the campaign more broadly.
Anthony, I'll just pose just a couple definitional things that people
Please.
had for Jared. One was how is he defining working class? And then also someone maybe thought they heard him draw a distinction between, where did this go? Strong populism and economic populism. And if you did say that, if you could clarify that.
Yeah, sure. So the way that we define class is not a single measure. We use different measures of class based on education, income, occupation, sometimes even different kinds of property ownership. Oftentimes, educational attainments or income are the only ones that are available in surveys. So they're kind of the obvious proxies. But even though there are, and if anybody is steeped in this stuff, there's a lot we could debate about. But the reality is that most of the time those measures go in the same direction, right? So there may be, if you only use education as a proxy for class, then you often see working class people having more conservative attitudes on social and cultural issues than you would if you used a measure of income and education, or one of occupation. But in most of what you saw here, we're using income and education. So people that are not high income and that do not have a 4-year college degree. Totally understand that there's many critiques that you could make of that decision. And that's why we try to look at it from different angles whenever possible to tease out any kinds of nuances between those definitions. And when it comes to strong versus what I think we said was weak economic populism, one of the things that we try to understand better at the Center for Working Class Politics is, does it matter the extent to which you are sort of really strident in your critiques of elites? And because we noticed that, Kamala Harris talked about the bad apples here and there all the time on the campaign trail, right? But she never talked about corporations as a class. She never talked about the economic elites sort of rigging the system. And so we try to look at that sort of distinction between, you might say, like a Bernie Sanders style condemnation of economic elites, and a kind of more mainstream, like kind of softer populism that says most capitalists play by the rules, most large firms play by the rules, but where there are bad apples, we need to sort of weed them out. And we found in a lot of the work that we do that working class voters, they tend to connect better with the stronger economic populism, which, seems to tap into their sort of anger and anxiety around economic insecurity to a greater extent than the kind of, the more milquetoast version you might say. So.
Thanks, Jared. I'm seeing a couple things in the chat. Erica, that Jared and I can respond to. Jim Boland says that, it's clear that a lot of the rationale that Jared has presented is quite accurate. He says, however, after folks have witnessed that Trump is a real threat to democracy, surveys are suggesting that they're increasingly concerned about the attacks on our democratic institutions. So a campaign based solely on threats to democracy is not enough, but it's an important part of it. Very, very true, Jim. We agree with that. What the surveys that we've seen so far show, however, is that while support for Trump, including among rural and working class voters, has waned, and I wouldn't say is steadily declining because it sort of ebbs and flows, but it has generally declined and fairly significantly since he took office. That's good. But what hasn't happened is the opposition party, the Democrats, nor sort of liberal and progressive people, they are not gaining the support that Trump is losing. So you do have more people concerned about everything from what he's doing on to the cruelty to immigrants, to the policing federal people in DC, and many other things. But because they're not seeing much from the resistance, at least not consistently, about what the alternative would be, they're sort of jumping ship from Trump, but they're not boarding our boats. And so that's, I think, another thing we really want to do. But this campaign for Ruby, and I'm sure for CWCP as well, is certainly being driven by this incredible crisis time we're in and preserving our democracy. But it's also being driven by the long-term need to have a party that actually fully and vigorously embraces working class and rural people and their concerns. So it's not just about defeating Trump. But yeah, that's a very good point. Kathy and Reese Shearer say we need ready-made slogans for the sign. So that's something that's come up one or two times. And I think that's something that we probably have, but could make available some ideas for different ways to concisely lift up these communities, these issues, these harms being done, focus on rural and working class. Kathy and Reese are neighbors of mine, so nudge me about that if we don't offer some of those up soon. And then I see one more about whether there's a coordinated effort to reach out to local radio and local papers. Well, in terms of the campaign, we've just started reaching out to media over the past few days. And we're reaching out to both kind of large mainstream media, like the New York Times and those sorts of outlets, as well as media that are more focused on rural and working class people. Jared, for instance, is going to be working with the folks at Jacobin to do a piece on the campaign. We've reached out to people at Barn Raising Media, at the Beacon in North Carolina, Daily Yonder. Beyond them, we would be very happy to help provide to anybody the basic press release we use or any other information. But really what we need is people on this call to go to their local papers and local radio stations with the content of the campaign and try to get it covered. Put your own spin on it from a local point of view. That's what we need, is an army of people out there raising this up.
I've got a couple more from the chat, but I also want to tell folks you are welcome to ask your question directly too. Just raise your little Zoom hand and we will call on you. Question about the abundance agenda. What is your opinion of it? And is there any role for it to be somehow connected to this campaign?
Jared, you want to start with that one?
I mean, not really. If you have any thoughts, maybe my take on it is that there are some elements of the abundance agenda that are legitimate and that are worth considering. But in general, I think that approach is quite overestimates some of the differences between the sorts of cities and states where they say things never get done and are bad, and those that are not. And also, I think it very underestimates the importance of some of these more transformative economic policies that we at CWCP, and I know through the Rural New Deal that Ruby has emphasized, and generally it's not a project that's about hearing the working class. It's not a project that's about trying to take back this country for ordinary working and rural people. It's a technocratic project that, while it has many specific elements that maybe or may not be useful from a policy standpoint, it's not the kind of messaging that we think would be particularly effective in trying to bring back many of the disaffected working class and rural folks that have gone over to the Republican side in the past decade.
I mean, I'd largely agree. I would just add that if you were to look through the Rural New Deal that Ruby wrote, Ruby and Progressive Democrats of America, sorry about that, wrote, there are certainly many of the specific policies we recommend within it. I don't know what percentage, but a goodly number that largely fit with the abundance agenda, because part of what we need is kind of, if not technocratic, it is local economic development officials emphasizing small businesses, local folks building food systems that give the farmer 70 cents on the dollar instead of 10 cents on the dollar. So a lot of building an economy that works for working people is about local solutions that tend to be kind of incremental. But if you only do that and you don't challenge the power of corporations, this is what 40 years of working in and researching community development taught me. If you don't challenge corporate power, then what you find very quickly is that your efforts to uplift independent businesses, family farms, they hit a ceiling quickly because the power differentials, both political and economic, are way too great. You've got to tackle anti-union stuff and antitrust. That has to be minimally part of the agenda. And I don't think the abundance folks want to touch that.
Here's one that relates to a little bit what you were just talking about, Anthony, and then I'll go to you, Philip. Where did that go? Oh, yeah, so someone noted that the right wing has been pretty successful building up power by starting at the state and local level. And so is that, is that what we're going to be doing here to kind of advocate for policies that can be implemented more at the local level?
It'll be a combination for sure. Again, the Rural New Deal, if that's not the only thing to talk about when you're talking about a new approach for working folks. But again, if you read that, you'll see that it's quite a mix. There's some things that can only be tackled at state or national level. Antitrust is one. Now that the Trump administration is reversing many of the Biden administration policies on antitrust or letting cases go that were strong cases against big corporations, state attorneys generals and state leaders are starting to accelerate their antitrust efforts. Similar things are happening in the unionization sphere, where the new National Labor Relations Board and this court decision that almost essentially, it didn't eliminate, but it tremendously weakened the National Labor Relations Act. States are trying to find ways that they can protect and promote even unionization. Within that framework, though, there are plenty of local policies that are part of rebuilding a society that works for working people. One very simple one, most state and local governments have for the last 40 or 50 years been spending taxpayer money to give to giant corporations to come locate in our area. It could be a Toyota plant, it could be a Amazon regional center, it could be a Walmart. Billions of dollars every year of tax money, often local money, along with state and federal. Locally, people can make the decisions, as they've done in some places, to stop spending money giving it to corporations who are already cash rich and start investing in a more diverse and independent business kind of economy. Those sorts of things we know work if you're willing to do them. So there's local elements and there's national elements to this. Philip?
Why don't you go to some of the hands now?
Yeah, Philip?
Yeah, Anthony, we haven't met before. It's a pleasure to be on this call with you. Been following your work from a distance for quite some time. I put a question in the chat, and I'm basically going to sort of, spin off that. Tim Gore in 2014, is part of Oxfam, stated the main way most people are going to experience climate change is through the impact on food, the food they eat, the price they pay for it, the availability and choice they have. I know beet juice runs through your veins because you farm, but I was surprised not to see any mention of the agricultural sector or the food issue in the Beyond Resistance. And I'm wondering if there's room at the table to include something like that, because I think we are already seeing food price inflation outpacing general inflation by 2 or 3 points. Everything that is happening on the climate front, our ignorance of what's happening that's impacting agriculture, rising energy costs, not to mention this latest, foolery with tariffs is going to contribute to that. And I think we're going to see in the next decade both extreme stresses, particularly in the lower economic end of the spectrum, as well as climate migrants arriving in many regions around the world, particularly in developed countries. They're going to put pressure on these kinds of systems. And I think it's a very important organizing point.
Yeah, Philip, absolutely. It is most definitely part of the campaign. I'll have to look at our materials to see exactly how we've talked about it. We do talk quite a bit about farmers and rural development broadly, but we may not be explicit enough, or it might need to be clearer on that. From our point of view, this is one of the things that the traditional resistance has largely missed. Farmers have been hammered from multiple ways. The larger farmers who are growing commodity crops, they've had everything from the tariffs really hurting their markets or making for great insecurity on pork and soybeans and other things, to the elimination of USAID, which is a disaster for human beings all over the world, also being disastrous in terms of a very substantial market that was just eliminated. When you go to smaller farmers doing specialty crops, produce, eggs, and things like that, you've had the fact that the Trump administration has completely eliminated the farm to school program and the farm to food bank program, both of which had created very stable and well-paying markets for small to mid-sized farmers to sell some of their produce to. This is the kind of program that's a win-win-win. It helps stabilize markets and improve prices for farmers. It puts healthy local food that hasn't traveled 2,000 miles on people's tables and in schools. And there are incentives in all of that to produce it in environmentally regenerative ways as well. On top of that, they've canceled contracts. Now, some of them apparently have been restarted, but thousands of farmers face cancellations of contracts under the so-called climate smart farming. Everything from fencing cattle out of streams to building up soil health, cover cropping, things to make the farms more resilient and to sequester carbon rather than emit carbon. That all went away. The Trump administration, under tremendous pressure, has apparently gone back and honored at least some of those contracts. But basically, they've said to farmers, if you have a clean energy plan, you wanted to put solar panels on the top of your dairy, you wanted to do soil building in order to help reduce carbon emissions, you have to now prove to the USDA that you're doing that consistent with Trump's vision for energy, which is all but impossible. So the farmers have been hit from so many different directions, and if we're not making that clear enough and prominent enough now, we certainly will as we go on. One of the things we hope to have is some local and regional gatherings of farmers around some of these issues. So thank you, Philip. Joanne?
Hi. I have to say, I love what you guys are doing. I've learned so much from joining your programs. I worry, maybe because I'm a business person, but I'm 2 generations away from peasants in Europe. So I worry this idea to go after all business as being evil, because for so many of us, and I think even in rural areas or working class people, we're all working for the man. And I think we've got to be more subtle. If you just attack business as bad, that's how most of us survive. So I feel like there's got to be a difference between Jeff Bezos and his whatever billion-dollar wedding and the small companies that give us jobs and mostly are trying to be good employers. And I feel like Democrats lose that nuance that, it's critical to keep people like me in the party too. How do you balance that?
Well, I'll let Jared comment in a minute. I'll just say that I agree with you completely. I think too often the Democratic Party's just been sort of squeamish about business and profit making. And as somebody who owns a farm and has also owned a small consulting business, I want to make money doing what I'm doing. I think if you see instances where we're not making that distinction clear, please tell us, because we never call out business. In fact, one of the things we've been saying for years is we've got to fight these small number of giant corporations that wield all this power, and at the same time, invest our money and our support into small and mid-sized businesses. It has to be both. But because we see a huge distinction, absolutely. But if you see anything in our materials or anything we say that seems to be sort of lumping all businesses together, we don't want to say that.
Okay.
So thank you. Jared, you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree, but I feel like it's actually a little bit ironic that I feel like Democrats often, in some ways are not critical enough of the big businesses and the corporate elite, and while not lifting up like the backbone of local economies, right? So I think that's a perfectly valid statement. And Republicans are, very Johnny on the spot about talking about the importance of small business owners, and that's something that pisses off a lot of people when they hear Democrats talking about this stuff. I know from my own family and friends that is in fact the case. So yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. We definitely feel like it's important to tap into the anger that people feel about the rigged economy under which we live. But the culprits of that are not the vast majority of small and medium-sized business owners. The corporate, the corporate elite that Anthony just mentioned, and their sort of stooges in Washington. Those are the culprits.
Okay. I thank you. That makes me feel better.
Great. Thank you, Joanne. I will do one more with in hands raised, Walter, and then Erica, maybe before we go to Murray, you can check and see if there's any other new questions in the chat. Walter?
Yeah, hi. I'm very impressed with a lot of what I'm hearing, but it's a follow-on to the last comment. It was something I put in the chat. I hear people equate Sanders-style politics with progressivism or with populism, and that always scares me. Not that I don't have a great deal of respect for Sanders, but I think in many ways Sanders represents, to many, rightly or wrongly, the anti-business kind of let the best be the enemy of the good approach that I think offends a lot of people, rightly or wrongly, and turns a lot of people off. And there are lots of people who I see who are adopting populist messages, but they're very different than Sanders, and they're getting a lot of traction. The one name that comes to my mind is Gluesenkamp Perez in Washington, but there are others. And and you say, flag if you're saying anything that feeds the stereotype of being anti-business. And I think the equation of populism with the Sanders left, I think is very dangerous. It I think narrows the scope of attraction. I think a lot of people share many of Sanders' views, but view him as unrealistic, or share them, but view it as too idealistic. And a lot of people see it as anti-business and anti-growth, or simply de-emphasizing issues of growth in business. And so I do think one of my frustrations, my background is as a union activist and union side labor lawyer for my career. And I see a kind of left that is very much a kind of academic left, or a middle class left that kind of wants a radicalism that doesn't have a lot of traction with significant numbers of people who would otherwise be favorable. So I just wanted to flag that and get reactions to it.
Yeah, I think that resonates with me really strongly, Walter. I feel like I said Bernie Sanders as kind of a shorthand for part of what I think Bernie Sanders represented, which was an attack on the rigged economy and corporate elites and inequality. And I think that basic package there is something that you do hear in MGP, and you do hear in Jared Golden, and you do hear in Gabe Vasquez, and you do hear in Sherrod Brown, and you do hear in other economic progressives that are populists that don't share the same policy commitments as Bernie Sanders. And I think that what you're saying is really important to emphasize, because I think Sanders and the left in general clearly underemphasizes the degree to which people in our society, working class people, care about economic growth, and they care about a healthy economy, and they care about hard work, and they care about, basic, sort of working class values that most
And the
people take for
aspirations
granted.
of a lot of them are to own their own business.
And yeah, absolutely. That said, and so I think in a lot of ways, MGP is a model. She's not the only one. Like I named a few other names that I think that sort of follow the same lines, or like Dan Osborne from Nebraska, who was overperformed
Absolutely.
dramatically. And we have a couple new candidates for Senate and governor in Maine who I think are fantastic, or who are speaking this language. But the thing that I hesitate a little bit with Glusenkamp Perez and also with somebody like Jared Golden is that they're so focused on their own districts, that they don't have much of a broader vision for economic change. And that's the thing that I think it's a hard needle to thread. I think the right to repair, obviously that resonates with a lot of rural folks, as it should, and it's an important policy, but it's not something that's going to capture the imaginations of the American people. And so we need to find those. And this is something that we're working and talking about all the time at CWCP, and would love to get your ideas if you have some
Well,
about.
I just want to caution that, I think, like, I've had fights with people about these issues, and that a lot of people who I think are quite hostile to working class people throw at me, look, if working class people were the way you think, they'd all be voting for Bernie Sanders. And the fact that they're not shows that they don't really, that there's no potential for gains there. And so I do think that the equation of the kind of Sanders progressivism with populism, as if they're one and the same, is very dangerous, and it leaves unchallenged the stereotypes of a lot of people who are quite hostile to working class interests.
Yeah, and we totally just I wouldn't disagree with you. I think that's a fair critique, and that's why we're trying to, offer a more nuanced understanding of what populism is and can be. And there's other sorts of policies out there, like around jobs and employment and keeping our communities, rural and small town communities, strong and vibrant, and reinvesting in them. Those are the sorts of things that, involve major economic changes, but are not viewed as sort of crazy left-wing pie in the sky policies. And those are the sorts of policies that cut across the working class, cut across, geography as being important and meaningful to working class people. And that's what, we need to, and that's what the Beyond Resistance campaign is in fact already centering. So that's why I'm excited about it in part.
Yep. Thank you, Walter. Erica, any new questions in the chat before we go to Murray?
Yeah, well, there's a couple that are kind of like, I'll pose them together because they're both sort of different versions of like, what's our theory of change and how are we going to actually like achieve, make concrete accomplishments here. Edward mentioned that like in his community, there've been some protests with pretty good turnout, but like, what does it all amount to? The energy by and large dissipates afterwards and nothing really seems to come of it. And then someone else kind of quipped like, so much analysis, the left analyzes everything to death. And meanwhile, Trump marches on with actions. So like, what are our actions and how is what we're talking about today building this campaign going to lead to what we want, the real concrete end goals? It's a tough question.
Right. We love the tough questions. So I think if you had to think of I talked about 4 legs to the Beyond Resistance campaign, but if you had to narrow it down, what are we really basically trying to accomplish? One is we need a resistance. We have it, but we need that resistance to also put the concerns of working class, factory workers, farmers, small businesses, and those people right up there with the others. Because the broader the turnout of people, whether it's a rally, a protest, a social media campaign, a letter writing campaign, the broader it is, including people that have been more likely to be in Trump's base, the more likely it is to have some impact in slowing Trump down. So long as it's like highly educated liberals, just to simplify it, oversimplify it, it's really easy for him and everybody in his cabinet to dismiss him. They already hate us, so to hell with us. But if that us is much broader, it's going to be harder to keep dismissing it. The second thing is the most critical, I think, which is this putting forward a clear platform for how it's going to be different. Too often, the left finds itself, we find ourselves, I believe, in a position of defending the system. And that's because Trump is ripping it to shreds in so many destructive ways. But the last thing we want to be at this moment, when so many people across the spectrum believe that the system is deeply flawed and totally rigged against them, is to be the defenders of the system. So while we're trying to save institutions and preserve the integrity and help public sector employees who've just lost their unions, while we're trying to do all of that, we also need to just be totally out front with how we are committed to building a much better system. This, again, the Rural New Deal is one piece of that. The Rural Democracy Initiative and rural organizing are working on their second version of a Rural Prosperity Action Plan. You have Mike Lux and his outfit working with a lot of folks on building contracts for working families, a political contract. There's many pieces we could put forward, but whatever it is or whatever combination, it ain't out there. It ain't out there. When you get the emails from Democrats and Move On and Indivisible, there's never anything about the plan for how we're going to make a system that works for people. That is the end goal, is actually winning people over with that plan and then implementing that plan so that we actually build a better, fairer economy and politics. I don't know, do you want to add anything to that, Jared?
How could I top it? Perfect. I agree.
Okay, I hope that answered. Murray. You're muted, Murray.
Sorry.
Yep.
There we go. I put this in the chat also, but just an example of reaching out to others. Our Attorney General here in Minnesota, I live in the far western edge of Minnesota, very small town, came out here, talked to farmers about right to repair. It is important to farmers, extremely important. And there were some hardcore Republicans at that meeting shaking their heads, thanking our lieutenant or our attorney general, who's a Democrat, for doing this on behalf of them. And also he had another meeting on consolidation, how the big farms are sucking up, water, spreading manure, poisoning land. And they're also making our small towns smaller because they hire immigrant labor quite often, not all the time, but pay them very poor wages. He sued one of them and was successful in winning. He said they treated their workers like you wouldn't treat your dog. He said it was that bad. So he's fighting for. And another thing, the lady who talked about small business, you can come out here. I would invite you out here to drive around to the small towns near where I live and look at all the empty storefronts that used to have a small business in them. And we have been governed for years by Republicans, and they have not invested in our communities. That I think they've taken advantage of our communities. And so our communities are getting smaller and there are fewer people here, partly because of their policies and what they have not done to help us. So I think there's a perfect opportunity to step in and share and talk about positives that can be done to improve our small communities, because people want to live out here, but they need services and resources to be able to survive, which Republicans have not invested in.
Thank you, Murray. I mean, that is a terrific example with Keith Ellison meeting with farmers about right to repair. And I don't know if it was the same meeting or another one talking about corporate takeover of agriculture, the food processing sector, the whole bit, the meat processing. I mean, events like that, you might already have some of these kinds of gatherings in mind. We're talking to people, and some of this is not yet confirmed, but like I've been, just was recently introduced to Will Westmoreland. Some of you might know Will, who is a farmer out in Missouri who writes The Back 40 and does a YouTube channel on that. And they're doing these meet in the middle events, which is not meet in the middle in the sense necessarily of policy, but where they go to communities and invite Republicans, Democrats, and independents, and then just have conversations about rural, about farming, whatever the issues are. Events like that that are already planned, we want to lift them up as part of the Beyond Resistance and get larger crowds out and realize that these things are happening. Or getting events where if it's not the state attorney general, maybe it's a local candidate for office who does a right to repair rally in a small rural place. And remember that there's two sides to the right to repair. It's really great. One side is farmers who want to be able to fix the tractors. The other is all the people who want to be able to fix their cell phones and their tablets and their computers. So you've got this very sort of younger urban crowd that's into right to repair, as well as farmers. Just imagine the potential for some gatherings there that lifts up potential legislation and also binds people together. So
And
many
just quickly,
things-
one thing I forgot to mention too is the Minnesota Farmers Union held what they called people's town halls around Minnesota to hear what people had to say, and it was hugely successful. And there's a report you can access about what they found out. So thanks.
Yeah, that's great. I had heard of that, but I've not read those reports. Thanks, Murray. Okay, let's go to Diana.
Okay. Hi, Anthony.
Hi, Diana.
I put this question in the chat and you've already answered it partially, but I'm going to read it anyway.
Okay.
This is a Virginia-centric question. Since, Anthony, you live in Southwest Virginia, are you talking to any of the candidates running in Southwest Virginia from either party or running as independents about lifting up our economy? To what extent do you think candidates are promoting real actions that are positive for those of us who live here? So I want to talk about what you have seen from candidates, not what, your great organizations are trying to do.
Sure, a little bit of that, Diana. Even though I work all the time and I'm manic, I still can't get everything I want to do. But I'll tell you that we've been working with Lily Franklin's campaign. Lily Franklin is a woman running for State House. She would be, if she wins this election, and she has a very good chance, the Democrat furthest southwest in the state. Up to this point, the last Democrat standing is in Roanoke, and Lily's district goes beyond Roanoke into the rural areas. We did a training with Lily's staff, and we're in contact with them, and also met with Adam. I've forgotten his last name, I'm afraid, Diana, but he's one of the people running for the 9th District Congressional Office, the seat I ran for in 2018. And he and I had a long conversation about exactly what you said, centering kitchen table and working people's issues. And I think he's off to a good start with that. We want to continue. On top of that, Meredith and I met with Larry Wohlers, who's with New Rural Virginia. Larry's been doing interviews of some of the candidates to lift them up who are running in rural Virginia. And we've offered, nothing's come of it yet, but we've offered to also work with them on whatever they might need, including maybe a little more support on understanding how to message around the economy and how to connect to local issues. So the short answer is, in a small way, yes, we are doing that. And also beyond the Virginia thing, we are really interested in working with working class and rural candidates in other areas as well, again, to lift them up.
Okay. Thanks for that information. I'm especially interested and gratified that Lily Franklin has been meeting with you because, as you probably know, I'm a big advocate and fundraiser for Lily.
Yep.
And but I'm interested not just in her campaign,
Sure,
but for others also. So thanks.
You bet. There's no other hands raised. Erica, do you see any unasked questions in the chat?
Not really. A couple people have commented pretty strongly that, the money in politics and campaign finance is such a core issue, and they feel like for it's part of the distrust working people have in government, that they're just, they're bought off by big donors and they just will not vote for any candidate until this problem is solved. It's not part of the Beyond Resistance campaign, but if you care to comment on your analysis of that problem.
You want to go first, Jared?
Well, yeah, obviously it's a huge problem and it's getting worse, over time through a whole bunch of different mechanisms. But that said, we're actually seeing room for and for challenges to folks in many different contexts where candidates are able to rely on. Well, this is on the right and the left, obviously. Small donor donations in a way that they weren't able to do in the past. And so it's a little bit ironically, actually, that we're seeing, more and more consolidation of large scale donations, but also increasing flexibility in some contexts for sort of insurgent or outsider candidates. Donald Trump being one of them, ultimately, in an important way, in 2016 at least, being able to circumvent those networks. And so I hear you, and you're right on a systemic level, but I don't think that negates the many real opportunities for challenging problematic and corporate Democrats and Republicans alike in many different districts across the country.
Yeah, I would only add, it's pretty much just reiterating what Jared has said. I completely agree that the money in politics, going back well before Citizens United, but kind of really hitting a new level with Citizens United, is so fundamental. It's in many respects one of the key parts of the foundation of the rigged system we have, no doubt about it. But I don't agree that we have to fix that first before we can address other problems, because it's one of the hardest things to fix. We've got a Supreme Court that is bound and determined to equate money with speech and corporations with people. And that Supreme Court ain't going to change the balance anytime soon. So we really have to chip away as in as big chunks as we can in other ways to make the system more responsive to people. So I think there's a lot of fights to fight. Ultimately, we're going to have to fight the money out of politics fight, no doubt about it. And as Jared said, there are candidates who are pledging no corporate money. My campaign, we took no corporate money. We still raised $1.1 million from most of it in the 9th District of Virginia because of people like Diana and Meredith and others. But the reality is that we have several levels we can and must work on, even as that sort of festers.
I will bring up actually one more thing that a couple people commented on in the chat is just how devastating the Medicaid cuts have been, and that coupled with we're now seeing the reporting about how health insurance premiums are set to skyrocket next year, which is just unbelievable. And so what about making that more of a cornerstone of this campaign is what people are wondering.
I think it will definitely be part of it. And it'll be, again, it'll play out probably more in the local and regional events that happen or other online events where people gather to talk about the impact of the Medicaid cuts or the reneging on the Obama era subsidies for Obamacare and that kind of thing. Absolutely. It's less of a central part of our effort because the other resistance, the existing resistance, is already putting a lot of time and energy into that. There's a lot of discussion about Medicaid cuts and actions of resistance and fighting back against it. There's a lot of discussion about rural hospital closures that are resulting from the Medicaid cuts or those plus other things. So not that those aren't critical issues and not that that isn't leverage, but what we want to do is sort of, as Jared said at the beginning, kind of fill a gap. And that's less of a gap than some of these other kind of job working issues that we're going to be focused on, but certainly critical. Well, we're a few minutes over. Thank you very much to Jared Abbott from the Center for Working Class Politics. Fabulous presentation, Jared. So glad to have you and your folks as key partners in this campaign. I'll mention some of the other partners. This isn't the whole list, but the Rural Democracy Initiative, Rural Organizing, Rust Belt Rising, Progressive Democrats of America, Mike Lux's outfit, American Family Voices, and many others. Please join us next Thursday night. We're going to get into much more detail, and then we're really going to be starting a campaign that we hope and believe will gain steam. It's going to be a snowball rolling down the hill and helping to round out the fight against Trump, but also a fight for something much better. That's what it's going to be about. And we hope every one of you will spread the word and join us in that. Okay.
Thank you
So much.